The story opens inside a workshop. A blonde-haired boy named Bernie felt a quiet joy as he looked at his finished creation. He truly believed it would make daily life easier for everyone around him. Standing before him was a lamp containing a colorful stone. His siblings, Cliff and Lucille, came over to check whether Bernie had invented something new again. Cliff mentioned that Bernie was already well known in town, with people saying he had become a great help to many. Lucille, clearly proud, hugged her younger brother. Bernie replied that it really wasn't that impressive. Their father told him that he should take more pride in himself, saying Bernie was the family's greatest treasure. Hearing that made Bernie even happier. With the abilities he had gained as a magical tool engineer, Bernie vowed to protect both his country and the family he cherished. In a different world, in another timeline, a weary man woke up as his smartphone alarm rang loudly. It was another ordinary workday, even though he felt as if his life had no one to live for. At his workplace, he was constantly handed tasks at the last minute. He questioned why he continued working there at all. While everyone else left for home, he stayed behind until midnight to finish the work dumped on him. After clocking out, he rushed to catch the final train. Just as he thought he had made it in time, he suddenly felt dizzy while climbing the station stairs. He misstepped and fell all the way down. As people nearby panicked, the man tried to move but couldn't. His consciousness slowly faded, and he understood that he was dying. As darkness closed in, memories from his childhood surfaced. He remembered playing alone with building blocks. His parents had died shortly after he was born, and he was sent to live in an institution. The staff there were kind, but as he grew older and watched other children leave with new families, the loneliness of having no blood relatives became heavier. Even after graduating high school, his heart felt hollow as he worked for a cruel company that exploited him. He questioned what his life's purpose even was. Tears streamed down his face as those memories flooded back. He tried to crawl toward the light. If another life truly existed, he wished to be born into a loving family and learn how to care for someone, even himself. As he grasped the light, his consciousness slowly returned. He woke up to someone calling him Bernie. Confusion washed over him, especially when he noticed his soft, baby-like cheeks. His mother told him it was time to drink his milk. Still confused, the protagonist was lifted into her arms. His father asked Dorothy if he could feed the baby, thinking their child would enjoy it. The protagonist tried to ask whether he was in a hospital, but only baby noises came out. Shocked that he couldn't speak properly, he wondered why a woman was holding him. Dorothy scolded her husband Scott for startling Bernie. When he was laid down on the bed, the protagonist realized the truth: he had become a baby. As he drank from the bottle, he began to think that maybe he hadn't died after all. The surroundings felt strange and unfamiliar, leading him to guess it might be a foreign land. After observing more closely, he concluded that it felt closer to a fantasy world. He believed he had died, yet somehow he was reborn as a baby in an unknown place. He questioned whether reincarnation was truly real. He then understood that the man and woman before him were now his parents. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Two children entered, calling out to their parents as they showed a golden flower they had brought back. Dorothy remarked that its color matched Bernie's hair. The children explained they had found it at a street stall and pooled their money together to buy it as a gift for Bernie. Hearing them call the couple Mama and Papa, the protagonist assumed they were his older siblings, though the flower wasn't their only present. The older sister leaned closer to Bernie and told him to watch carefully. She stood still, raised her hands toward him, and spoke the word, blessing. Light took the shape of butterflies and fluttered around her. Watching the gentle yet radiant scene, the protagonist realized his sister had used magic. She said she was finished and wished for Bernie to grow up with steady happiness in his future. Dorothy and Scott were surprised that Lucille could already use blessing magic. Lucille explained she had worked hard to learn it the day before, just for Bernie. Her older brother Cliff complained that it wasn't fair to show off alone and said he also wanted to demonstrate how cool he was. Lucille reminded him that his talent was swordsmanship and that showing it inside the house would be dangerous. Cliff promised Bernie that he would show his sword skills later and swore that no matter what happened, he would always protect him. Lucille replied that she could protect Bernie herself using magic. Cliff insisted that the responsibility belonged to him. Bernie watched the two argue while resting in Dorothy's arms. Scott gently patted both of their heads, saying they had grown into wonderful children. The two siblings looked at each other and smiled. Cliff proudly stated that he would always be Lucille's dependable older brother. Lucille replied that he should learn to accept moments like this with grace. Seeing how capable they were, Dorothy asked if they could help her prepare dinner. The protagonist felt overwhelmed for a moment. This was the kind of warm scene he had only ever watched from a distance in his past life. Now, as Bernie, he finally had a family, and he realized that he was no longer alone. Soon after, the family traveled to another location. Bernie looked excited as Scott explained that they were heading to the royal capital's cathedral to check Bernie's job aptitude. Since Scott worked as a blacksmith and ran a workshop in the capital, they planned to stop there first before going together. As Bernie gazed at the passing scenery and listened to their conversation about different jobs, he understood that he truly lived in a different world. During a short break, Cliff practiced with his wooden sword, striking a rock he used as a training dummy. Bernie looked toward his father and tried to ask what his brother was doing, but Scott simply replied that Cliff was doing his usual practice. Cliff had an aptitude for becoming a swordsman and dreamed of being an adventurer who explored dungeons across the world. Scott also mentioned that Lucille had an aptitude for becoming a mage and already showed talent in magic. Everyone possessed powers tied to their jobs, and both siblings trained every day to move closer to their dreams. Bernie found them admirable despite their young age. He then remembered that his father worked as a blacksmith, meaning there was no clear successor for the workshop. Scott proudly explained how he had made Cliff's practice sword himself. Bernie tried to ask what would happen to the workshop, but only baby sounds came out. Scott thought Bernie was showing interest in the workshop because he kept pointing at it, but he apologized and explained that there were many dangerous tools inside, so he couldn't bring him in yet. Bernie wanted to say that wasn't what he meant at all, but he couldn't speak properly. Scott told him not to pout. If the appraisal ritual showed that Bernie had an aptitude for crafting, he would make a special exception and show him the workshop. Even so, he said he wanted Bernie to walk whatever path in life he truly wished for. Hearing that, Bernie began to wonder what kind of job and powers he would receive. Just then, Cliff's practiced sword suddenly broke. He burst into tears because his father had worked so hard to make it for him. Bernie felt worried seeing his older brother cry. He wondered if there was something he could do with the strange power he didn't yet understand. As he thought about fixing the sword, a status window appeared in front of him. He didn't understand its meaning, but it looked like a game-style menu where he could select options. He noticed something labeled reincarnation bonus. When he checked the details, a skill called enhanced repair appeared. It could be chosen as his reincarnation bonus. From the word repair, Bernie guessed what it might do. Since this was a world filled with magic, he felt that repairing the sword might truly be possible. He checked the required materials. The screen indicated that one magic ore was needed, but Bernie didn't have anything like that. Suddenly, he noticed Cliff's necklace glowing faintly. He made baby sounds to catch his brother's attention. Cliff wiped away his tears and looked at him, feeling slightly embarrassed for crying. Bernie realized that Cliff couldn't see the glow from the necklace, which convinced him even more that he possessed some kind of special power. He still didn't fully understand what he could do, but for the family that showed him so much love, he wanted to try. Bernie grabbed the necklace and pointed his left hand toward the broken sword. Cliff tried to pull the sword away, but it floated up on its own. Bernie focused silently, and in an instant, the practiced sword was completely repaired. Cliff stared at it in disbelief. Bernie felt relieved when he saw that the sword looked normal again. Cliff caught it and examined it closely, sensing something different. He swung the sword at the large boulder he used for training and sliced it cleanly in half as if it were soft. Both brothers froze in shock. Cliff turned to Bernie with excitement, saying he had seen what happened. He was certain that the boulder had been cut because of Bernie's power. Scott and Dorothy rushed out of the workshop after hearing the noise and asked what was going on. Scott's eyes immediately went to the cleanly split boulder. Cliff explained that Bernie had fixed his sword and that he had used it to cut the rock. Scott examined the sword and then looked at Bernie, who still appeared stunned by what he had done with his newfound ability. Scott set the sword down and approached his sons, relieved that neither of them was hurt. He reminded Cliff that he hadn't split the rock by himself, so he still needed to continue his training. Later, at the cathedral, Scott greeted a priest cheerfully and thanked him in advance. The priest smiled and asked Dorothy how she was doing. Dorothy replied that she was well and thanked him for his concern. The priest then turned his attention to Bernie, the main reason they were there. He lifted Bernie up and noted that the child looked healthy. As they walked inside, the priest explained that this world had things called jobs. These jobs determined what kind of work a person was suited for, and each job granted specific powers. With enough potential and special training, people could even advance into professions. It was customary for everyone to undergo the appraisal ritual shortly after birth to learn their job. They entered a room with a large crystal ball placed at the center. The priest stated that Cliff was a swordsman and Lucille was a grand mage. He wondered what job little Bernie would receive. He guided Bernie to the crystal ball and asked him to touch it. The same screen from before appeared, and the crystal ball began to shine brightly. Scott asked about the result. The priest confirmed that Bernie's job was magical tool engineer. He explained that it was extremely rare, saying he had never seen it before. He added that it was in the same field as Scott's blacksmith job, making Bernie an ideal successor for the workshop. Even so, Scott said he had no intention of forcing that choice on him. Bernie would decide his own future. As a father, he wanted to respect and support whatever path his children chose. His words deeply moved Lucille and Cliff, and Dorothy understood how genuinely happy Scott felt. At that moment, Bernie realized something important. Being born into this world gave someone who once knew only loneliness a second chance. Bernie wanted to protect the happiness he shared with his family. Deep in his heart, he quietly vowed to become a great magical tool engineer and grow strong enough to support them. A year passed. Cliff's sword skills improved rapidly through daily training. He could now split rocks with an ordinary practice sword, and it seemed Scott had already introduced him to an adventurer. As for Bernie, he still didn't fully understand his role as a magical tool engineer. He had repaired small things like broken plates a few times, but his family rarely allowed him to use his power. Watching his brother train so seriously, Bernie realized there was no need to rush his own growth. That day was special because the family planned an outing together. They rode in a carriage to a place Scott had chosen. He explained that Lucille would soon enter the academy, and they would miss her. Dorothy agreed, saying that was why they wanted to spend time together before she left. Lucille looked sad, even though she understood. Bernie remembered his sister was already 7 years old. As a Grand Mage, Lucille didn't need to take the Royal Academy exam, and her enrollment would begin the following week. At first, she was excited, but the thought of leaving her family weighed heavily on her. Since the academy was a boarding school, she could only return during long breaks. Bernie wondered if she felt lonely. Cliff gently ruffled Lucille's hair, trying to cheer her up. She looked touched and smiled faintly. Relieved, Bernie also felt hopeful. He had a small plan of his own and wanted to make as many memories with her as possible. Soon, the family arrived at a quiet lake with clear water. Scott explained that it was a hidden spot near the royal capital he had discovered back when he was still an adventurer. The area was protected by the Royal Magic Corps' barrier, preventing monsters from appearing. Only highly intelligent, powerful creatures could sometimes pass through, but they rarely came near human towns. Bernie was surprised to learn his father had once been an adventurer. The thought of dungeons and monsters sounded dangerous but also intriguing. Scott then reminded Dorothy to give Bernie a charm and mentioned Cliff needed a replacement since his old one had lost its magic. Dorothy handed Bernie a charm similar to Cliff's old one. Scott explained it was made from magic ore and joked that Bernie might use it in his own unique way. Bernie realized his father was referring to his strange power. Afterward, Scott encouraged everyone to take a walk around the lake. The family strolled together, spotting a small squirrel nibbling on nuts. They later found a flower field and made flower crowns. Eventually, they reached a fishing spot where Scott, Cliff, and Lucille tried their luck. Lucille suddenly felt a pull, and with help, she reeled in a large fish. They grilled it on the spot. Bernie nearly drooled at the sight. Lucille proudly claimed the catch and helped feed Bernie. Cliff teased that it only happened because he supported her, while Lucille insisted she landed it herself with their father's help. Bernie refocused and managed to speak clearly, praising both his brother and sister. Lucille froze in surprise, and Bernie felt happy, realizing his speech was improving. Cliff also praised him, while Dorothy smiled warmly, glad Lucille heard Bernie call her big sister before leaving. After eating, Cliff asked if he could take Lucille and Bernie for a short walk. Scott allowed it, reminding him not to go far. The siblings walked together. Lucille asked about Cliff meeting the adventurer. He explained that the law prevented him from becoming one until 13, so at 9 he was only an apprentice. Real dungeon exploration would take time. He added that dungeons were dangerous, unlike the protected area near the lake. Still, Lucille wondered why he wanted to go. Cliff said he had a dream and another reason he couldn't share, leaving her curious. Bernie smiled as they talked, but then noticed movement near the bushes. Sensing something hidden, he tried to warn them. Cliff assumed it was an animal. Instead, a massive wolf stepped out. It was far larger than a normal one. The siblings froze. Bernie remembered the barrier should have stopped monsters. Lucille asked what to do. Cliff told her to stay behind him and said he would distract it so she could escape with Bernie. She refused to leave him. Bernie noticed Cliff shaking legs and searched for a way they could all survive. Suddenly, the wolf moved, but instead of attacking, it looked exhausted and turned away. Bernie realized it showed no hostility and seemed injured. He remembered his father's words about intelligent monsters passing the barrier. If it was intelligent, maybe it could understand them. At that moment, Bernie's magic stone charm began to glow brightly. The floating screens appeared again, reacting to something nearby. Bernie quickly realized he could use this to get out of the situation. He grabbed his scarf and activated it together with the magic stone. The intense light caught his siblings' attention. When the glow faded, Lucille looked confused about what had just occurred. Bernie made small baby sounds, and somehow Cliff understood that Bernie wanted them to put the scarf on the monster. Bernie confirmed it with more sounds. Lucille tried to stop them, worried it could be dangerous, but Cliff trusted Bernie since the wolf had shown no hostility. As Cliff carefully approached, he apologized in his own way for earlier pointing his sword and promised not to harm it if it remained calm. To prove that promise, he asked the wolf to wear the scarf. The wolf slowly lowered itself in a gentle manner. Cliff thanked it and explained that the scarf was something his little brother had made. The wolf accepted it and commented that it was not bad. Cliff felt relieved that it liked it. The wolf then introduced himself as Alberos, a divine beast, and asked if they would hear his request. Cliff was about to respond when he noticed how strange the situation was. None of them could believe the wolf was speaking, or that it had been a divine beast all along. Alberos realized his words were being understood because of the scarf and asked Bernie if that was the case. Bernie felt happy knowing the translator worked, though he wondered what the divine beast wanted. Lucille then asked if something had happened to him, since he looked like he was suffering. Alberos explained that he had fallen ill and gone to the lake to rest, but lost control of his body. He asked if they had any potions. Lucille suspected it was magic poison, causing Cliff to ask what that meant. Lucille explained that magic poison corrupted the magic flowing through the body, slowly taking away control. It could occur naturally or be generated nearby under certain conditions. Cliff immediately understood how serious it was. Lucille said they needed to inform their father so he could report it to the Royal Magic Corps. Before that, she asked Alberos to stay still. She hugged him and cast healing magic. Alberos thanked her, saying he felt much better. Cliff was shocked that she could use healing magic. Lucille admitted she hadn't mastered it, but learned the basics for emergencies. Cliff praised her. Alberos then thanked them all and asked if they wanted anything in return. Without hesitation, Lucille asked him to live with them. Cliff and Bernie were stunned. Bernie assumed there was a clever reason, but Lucille simply wanted a pet dog at home. Everyone fell silent. Cliff pointed out that Alberos wasn't a dog and had his own will. Surprisingly, Alberos agreed, saying he had been curious about living among humans. The siblings brought Alberos home and asked their parents for permission. Scott turned to Dorothy for her opinion. She agreed, believing it would attract good attention to the workshop. Bernie couldn't believe his mother planned to turn a divine beast into a mascot. Cliff even gave him the nickname, Al. Scott became interested in the scarf Bernie had created. He believed Bernie had worked hard to protect his siblings. He lifted Bernie and thanked him. Since everyone agreed, Scott accepted Al into the family. Al said it was his way of repaying them. From that day on, as part of the family, he vowed to protect them. Time passed, and the family grew. Lucille entered the academy. Cliff continued his sword training. Bernie began developing his abilities. Each of them followed their own path. Meanwhile, in a distant mansion, a report arrived stating the magic poison incident from years ago had been resolved, yet signs of recurrence remained. Plans were made to investigate with the Royal Magic Corps, awaiting Lord Zolian's approval. The man named Zolian smiled when he heard the words magic poison. One day, Scott asked Bernie to deliver an item quickly, promising one magic ore as a reward. Bernie grew excited and asked Al to come along. Along the way, Al noticed Bernie's enthusiasm. Bernie explained how valuable magic ore was for a magical tool engineer. Over the years, Bernie had come to understand his job's true power. It allowed him to create and repair items, though special functions came with conditions. The first condition was recipes and levels. Recipes showed required materials and methods, unlocking as his level increased through regular repair work. The second condition was magic ore. No matter his level, magic ore was essential for adding special effects. With mining output decreasing and prices rising, it had become rare. Pocket money helped, but saving enough would take time. Al reminded Bernie that everyone recognized his hard work. Soon, they arrived in the nearby town. Bernie located the delivery destination and completed the task. Afterward, he thanked Al and suggested stopping for dinner. Al proposed T-bone steak, and Bernie agreed to spend the money he had saved. They entered a restaurant where an auntie welcomed them. Bernie ordered omelet rice and a T-bone steak. The auntie said she would ask Dorothy to bring their food. Dorothy peeked out from the kitchen and waved with a smile. Al felt relieved seeing her healthier. Bernie agreed, remembering her past weakness, but she looked much better now. He had heard she was now the diner's ace. Thinking about it, Bernie realized she had grown much healthier ever since Al joined the family. He quietly wondered if having a divine beast nearby brought some kind of blessing. When Al asked if something was wrong, Bernie said it was nothing. At that moment, the diner auntie greeted new customers. It turned out to be Cliff and a girl named Petty. Cliff said it was a coincidence and asked if Bernie was helping their father again. Bernie replied that he had just finished. Petty smiled and said it had been a while, then asked if they could eat together. Cliff assumed Petty would order the same turkey burger as him and went to place the order. Bernie leaned closer to Petty and whispered an apology for interrupting their date. Petty blushed and said it was fine. When Cliff returned, he tried to ask what Petty wanted but froze when he noticed her red face. Petty said that she and Cliff were only comrades. Cliff agreed with a serious expression, which only made Petty look disappointed. Al recalled that the two were already 14 and members of the adventurer team Keijiru. He remarked that young men and women usually grew closer, but Cliff seemed completely unaware. Bernie reminded him that Petty was Zack's daughter, the team leader. Zack loved his daughter and also trusted Cliff, while Cliff saw Zack as a second father. Perhaps Petty also viewed Cliff as family. Bernie then asked his brother if he had a quest later. Cliff said no and explained they had just completed a herb gathering request and were heading back to the guild to report. Petty tried to add that their next task was gathering magic ore, but Cliff quickly covered her mouth, leaving her flustered. Bernie was certain he heard magic ore and shot his brother a sharp look. Magic ore was expensive to buy, but gathering it directly cost nothing. If he could obtain some, he could use unlocked recipes and raise his level. He tried to ask Cliff something, but Cliff cut him off and refused. He already knew Bernie was about to ask to come along. Bernie's shoulders drooped. Cliff told him curiosity was good, but reminded him he was only 6 years old. Even if magic ore gathering didn't involve dungeons, monsters could still appear. He worried something might happen and that their father would be furious. Meanwhile, Petty seemed pleased after kissing Cliff's hand. She told him to calm down and whispered to Bernie that she would help him as his big sister. She reminded Cliff of Keijiru's rule that any unusual matters had to be reported to the leader. That meant the leader made the final decision. Cliff acknowledged the rule but pointed out Bernie wasn't an adventurer. Just then, someone brought their food and said it was fine. It was Dorothy. She reminded Cliff that he used to run around everywhere when he first started. If he was that worried, he should protect his brother himself. Cliff said that was already expected. Dorothy added that Scott had once been part of Zack's team, and if Zack approved, Scott would as well. She held Bernie's small hands and told him to be honest about his feelings. Bernie remembered why he needed magic ore. It was essential for growing as a magical tool engineer. He nodded with determination, agreeing with his mother. Dorothy then told them to head to the guild together. Soon after, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild, which Bernie was visiting for the first time. He reminded himself not to get ahead of things and to earn the leader's approval first. Cliff led him to the attached inn used as Keijiru's base, warning that it might feel intimidating and telling him to act normal. Petty added that the leader might look scary, even like a gang boss, but he was actually kind. Bernie thought her explanation didn't help much. They reached the door, and the two young adventurers led him inside. Everyone relaxed when they saw them return safely. Bernie held his breath as he noticed a man with an eye patch. He was Keijiru's leader, Zack. Petty called him a worrywart. Zack replied that even simple things could be difficult. He then asked who the small boy was. Bernie stood straight. Zack leaned closer and noticed how much Bernie resembled Dorothy. Bernie introduced himself. Cliff explained that Bernie was his younger brother and that they had a request for the leader. Zack asked what kind of request it was. Petty told her father to stop glaring and scaring Bernie. Zack said he wasn't glaring and asked again. Bernie raised his voice and said he wanted to join Cliff and Petty on their magic ore gathering quest. Zack looked surprised and stared at him sharply. Bernie thought the man was frightening, but he needed his approval. He told himself to be brave. He explained that his job was magical tool engineer and that he wanted to obtain magic ore from this quest so he could use his abilities and improve little by little. He said he hoped to become a proper magical tool engineer as soon as possible. Reminding himself to stay honest, he added that he wanted to be useful to his family. Silence filled the room. Zack then smiled, gently patted Bernie on the head, and said he passed. Bernie felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Zack said his old friend Scott always boasted about his children and trusted them deeply. Bernie had just shown that trust, and for Zack, that was already enough. It was the first time Cliff and Bernie realized their father was truly proud of them. Even so, Zack said it wouldn't be safe to send only Cliff and Petty with a child, so he assigned a young man named Joseph to join them. Zack explained that Joseph might be young, but he was capable and would act as their escort. He reminded them all to be careful. Later, the boys told their parents about the quest, and Scott learned they already had Zack's approval. Bernie also asked for Scott's permission because he wanted to grow stronger. Scott still felt uneasy, worried about possible monsters. Cliff assured him that he would protect his younger brother if anything happened. He promised to bring Bernie home safely and asked his father to trust them. Dorothy leaned against Scott and said their children had grown well. Zack smiled and agreed, saying their growth felt sudden. The next day, Scott told Joseph he was counting on him. Before they left, he hugged the children tightly and sent them off. The two brothers smiled at each other and finally set out on their first adventure together. On the road, Joseph drove the carriage and said it would take about 2 hours to reach Rodneo Valley, where magic ore could be found. He suggested they rest while they could. Cliff thanked him. As they traveled, Bernie noticed a no-entry sign along a nearby path. Al reminded him that the path led to the place where they first met. Bernie guessed it was connected to the magic poison. Joseph explained that 5 years earlier, when magic poison was discovered in that forest, the Royal Magic Corps investigated the area for an entire year. Trade routes were later declared safe, but the forest and lake remained contaminated. Bernie understood why the area was restricted. Even so, it was where he first met Al, and the memory made him feel a little sad. Soon after, they reached their destination. Joseph told the younger ones it was time to gather magic ore. Bernie felt excited, unaware that an ominous presence quietly watched them from afar. He looked around Rodneo Valley with curiosity, thinking it was beautiful as he finally saw where magic ore was found. Joseph warned them that low-level monsters sometimes appeared and told everyone to stay alert. Their first task was to locate an ore deposit. Bernie asked to handle that part, saying he wanted to use something he had prepared. He took out a compass bracelet. Cliff remembered Bernie staying up late every night working on something and wondered what it was. Bernie activated the bracelet, and a bright light appeared, pointing in one direction. Petty watched the light, trying to understand its purpose. Bernie explained it was a magical tool that detected magic ore and showed its location. He believed it would make searching easier. Joseph was impressed and said he wanted to see how effective it was. Bernie led the group by following the light. After a while, they arrived in a vein rich with magic ore. Everyone was amazed. Bernie felt proud, knowing the effort he spent processing magic ore during his errands had paid off. Joseph praised the tool and asked if Bernie could also create weapons. Bernie said his job had limitations, but with the right materials, it was possible. Cliff added that Bernie had made his sword. Joseph said he hoped to receive one someday. Since they found the quarry, Joseph told everyone to gather the ore quickly. They all began mining. Petty reached for a piece when Cliff casually supported her from behind, making her blush. Joseph laughed as he watched them. Bernie and Al gathered ore together. Using Bernie's tool, they located another deposit without difficulty. Joseph was amazed at how much they collected in such a short time. With the tool, they no longer needed advanced detection magic. He said it might even rival the elite techniques taught at the Royal Academy. Petty believed Bernie could compete with many other jobs thanks to his tools. Bernie thanked them but still wondered if he could ever match his sister, Lucille. Joseph then recalled that Lucille was Cliff's sister and that Cliff helped pay part of her tuition. Cliff tried to stop him, but it was too late. Bernie asked what he meant by tuition since Lucille's fees were fully waived. Cliff had no choice but to explain. Lucille was a special student whose tuition was waived, but the waiver did not cover everything. The remaining cost was not impossible, yet Cliff knew their father worked hard for Lucille's future. That was why he wanted to become a full-fledged adventurer as soon as possible so he could help support the family finances. Bernie realized this was the dream Cliff had kept hidden from Lucille all along. Cliff told Bernie not to look so sad. He said he had his own dream of becoming the greatest adventurer in the world, traveling to places no one had ever reached, discovering treasures, and saving people from monsters. Just imagining that future filled him with excitement. He loved his family and wanted to protect everyone precious to him. He would accomplish both goals. He would earn money quickly and expand the workshop even further. Bernie then said he wanted to help as well. He promised to become the best magical tool engineer in the royal capital and support their family. Cliff pulled him into a tight hug. The others watched as he acted like a caring older brother. Suddenly, Petty noticed something odd. Nearby, several dirty weapons were scattered across the ground. She wondered why weapons would be left behind in a place like this. She asked Joseph to check them. Joseph thought they belonged to people who had encountered monsters and abandoned them while escaping. He believed those people might still be close by, and since they had gathered enough magic ore, he suggested retreating soon. The moment he told everyone to move out, Al growled after sensing something nearby. Joseph immediately ordered everyone to prepare and drew his sword. Cliff and Petty followed him at once. Bernie felt confused about their sudden tension. A massive gorilla-like monster appeared and slammed the ground where they had been standing. Everyone dodged just in time, and Al swiftly carried Bernie away. They stared in shock as the monster roared furiously at them. Joseph wondered why such a creature was in this area. The monster began smashing everything around it. Al told Bernie to climb onto his back so they could retreat immediately. Joseph responded by telling him to leave the monster to them. He and the others urged Al to go as they engaged the monster. The creature suffered heavy wounds but quickly counterattacked. It slashed at Joseph with its claws. In that instant, Joseph noticed the monster's wounds regenerating. Cliff leapt over the monster's head and warned the others not to give it time to recover. The monster noticed him and struck him away, sending him flying toward a nearby cliff. It then turned its attention to Petty. She tried to defend herself but was kicked back and rolled across the ground. Bernie grew anxious for both of them. Joseph threw a smoke bomb, blocking the monster's vision. He ordered Cliff and Petty to take Bernie and Al and escape. They were shocked. He told them to head for the royal capital and call for help. He would hold the monster off until then. Petty refused, saying they could not leave him behind. Cliff also wanted to stay and fight. Joseph told them not to act recklessly. He said it was the duty of adults to protect children, which was why the leader had sent him with them in the first place. He urged them to leave before the smoke cleared, leaving them no choice. Joseph faced the monster alone. Everyone understood what that meant. Bernie understood as well. If they hesitated any longer, Joseph's resolve would be wasted. Even so, Bernie could not abandon a comrade. Suddenly, part of the cliff collapsed and rocks fell toward Bernie. Al quickly shielded him from the falling debris. He explained that the monster was an abnormal species, one that could overwhelm even him if he tried to fight while protecting everyone. He told Bernie to decide whether they should escape or continue fighting. Bernie's magical tool suddenly shone and pointed towards something. It reacted to an object buried beneath the newly exposed cliff face. The light was intense, making Bernie believe it was not ordinary magic ore. He concluded it must be a great magic ore. With that realization, he felt he could create something to turn the situation around. He looked around and noticed the abandoned weapons. He told Al to move. Al immediately charged and attacked the monster, forcing it back toward a nearby cliff and pinning it down. Bernie asked Joseph if he could stall the monster for 3 minutes. Joseph grew angry and repeated that they should retreat. Bernie grabbed his hands and said he still had his magical tool engineer abilities. He reminded him that they were a party and that Joseph should not die alone because they would all survive and return together. He asked Joseph to trust him. Everyone was stunned by Bernie's sudden determination. Joseph laughed, and Bernie told him it was not a joke. Joseph said Bernie was right. If he could not trust his comrades after hearing that, he would be nothing more than a coward. He hoped Bernie would make him a good weapon once they returned to the royal capital. In the worst case, he told Bernie to retreat with Al and asked Cliff and Petty to assist. Both agreed. Joseph then said he would buy them 3 minutes. They raised their weapons for his sake. While Al distracted the monster, Bernie told everyone he would work with Al to create a magical tool and asked them to secure 3 minutes. Joseph instructed Cliff and Petty to attack together once the monster focused on him. Bernie soon called Al back. As Al passed them, he told Cliff to believe in himself. Cliff simply nodded. The 3 adventurers then rushed forward. Bernie asked Al to retrieve the great magic ore from within the cliff wall. He moved toward the abandoned weapons nearby. While watching Bernie work, Cliff struggled with the fact that he had to rely on his younger brother, who was still small, to help them escape this crisis. The feeling of helplessness weighed on him as he realized he still could not protect the people he cared about. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw Bernie stumble under the weight of the old weapons he was carrying. Even then, Bernie's determined expression never wavered. Seeing that resolve snapped Cliff out of his self-pity. He knew this was not the time to feel weak. As he narrowly avoided the monster's attack, he reminded himself why he had trained so hard until now. It was all to protect the people standing in front of him, his family. The adventurer he dreamed of becoming never hesitated in moments like this and never retreated. With that resolve, Cliff leaped forward and slashed the monster's eye with perfect timing. He refused to doubt his own potential. The monster roared in pain as its vision was lost. Joseph scolded Cliff for acting alone but still acknowledged his courage, immediately signaling Petty to follow up. While the others held the monster back, Bernie gathered everything he could find. At that moment, a magic ore dropped directly into his arms, and Al returned right on time. Bernie stared in awe at the intense glow coming from the great magic ore. Without hesitation, he began fusing it with the scattered weapons. The monster shrieked as it swung its massive claws wildly. It then rushed straight toward Cliff. Bernie shouted in panic, but Cliff recalled Al's words about trusting himself. To his own surprise, he chose to stand his ground. He blocked the monster's strike and caught its claws with his sword. The force pushed him back until Joseph and Petty joined him, helping to hold it off. Together, they tried to overpower the monster, but the pressure became too much, and all their weapons shattered at once. The monster followed up with a brutal punch, sending everyone crashing to the ground. Their bodies lay motionless, broken weapons scattered around them. The monster sneered as it searched for Bernie, unaware of where he had gone. Even then, Cliff weakly muttered that the monster had already lost. Soaring above it, Bernie refused to waste the opportunity everyone had given him. Resting a massive cannon on his shoulder, he fired without hesitation. The monster froze in confusion as a beam of light tore straight through its chest. A gaping hole opened in its body before it collapsed heavily onto the ground. Bernie wondered if it was finally over. Suddenly, something burst from the wound. Cliff warned everyone to cover their mouths as magic poison filled the air. Bernie was confused, unable to understand why magic poison had appeared here at all. Moments later, the thick mist was violently drawn away toward another location. Bernie tried to confirm if the fight was over, but Cliff suddenly pulled him into a tight embrace. Only then did Bernie realize Cliff was crying in relief, overwhelmed that his little brother was safe. Bernie broke down as well, saying it was finally time to go home. Still, Joseph felt uneasy. An abnormal monster and magic poison appearing in a supposedly safe area meant something was wrong. For now, survival was enough. Deep in the forest, a hooded man wearing distinctive earrings watched in disappointment. The Rodney Valley incident officially came to an end, and the entire area was sealed off. Cliff, Bernie, and Al returned home with heavy hearts. Instead of anger, Scott and Dorothy welcomed them back with warm embraces. Their peaceful daily life was meant to resume. Bernie later forged new weapons for Joseph and Petty. He shared the story at the diner, but one day he noticed the place was unusually empty during lunchtime. The aunt teased him, saying the diner felt reserved just for him again. She explained that since the attack, adventurers had stopped coming. Most customers were adventurers, and many had relocated after the Rodney Valley was sealed, as it had once been a safe source of magic ore. Businesses that depended on adventurers were now suffering. Hearing this left Bernie and Al feeling heavy-hearted. The aunt apologized for dampening the mood and asked if they wanted to order. On the way home, Al reflected on how the magic poison was still under investigation. Its effects had already reached the royal capital, and solving it would not be simple. He wondered if there was anything he could do. He hoped adventurers would find a reason to remain in the city. When they reached home, they saw a crowd gathered outside. Scott remarked that the timing was perfect for his return. Bernie learned that the adventurers were there to see him. They had heard about his weapons from Joseph and believed his work was the best in the capital. Hearing that made Bernie genuinely happy. Then it hit him. If adventurers came to the capital specifically for his weapons, it could revive the city and support his father's workshop. He realized this was something only he could do as a magical tool engineer. He asked his father to let him take responsibility for the work. Scott smiled proudly, patting Bernie's head and saying he would support him, warning that life was about to get much busier. The adventurers eagerly shouted their requests, but Bernie asked them to calm down first. Meanwhile, at the academy, a hooded figure met Professor Evans, an expert in ecology who had researched magic poison for years. The man suggested the poison had developed a new property. Evans listened with growing excitement. The man's earrings glowed faintly as he smirked. It was the same man from before. Looking out the window, he noticed Lucille sitting on a bench with a friend and asked Evans to cooperate in his experiment. Some time had passed since the Rodney Valley incident, yet Bernie felt the situation had only worsened. The streets were dull, and the shops lacked energy. He knew he could only focus on what was within his reach, and Al shared the same thought. They entered Kagaru's base, where Joseph greeted them. Bernie handed over the items Zach had requested earlier. Zach expressed his gratitude and suggested they run a small test before he departed. Joseph mentioned that Bernie's weapons had gained recognition and that demand was spreading beyond Kagaru's party to adventurers throughout the capital. Bernie thanked them for their support. Joseph then noticed Bernie's gloomy mood and asked about it. Bernie explained that the capital felt unusually quiet and empty, and he believed he needed to work even harder. Joseph agreed, noting that the number of adventurers in the city had dropped sharply since the incident. Zach blamed a man named Zolian for overreacting and designating areas as restricted zones. Bernie asked if Minister Zolian had ordered the closure, and Zach confirmed it. Zach explained that the minister had never favored adventurers who dealt in magic ore and likely found the situation convenient. No one knew when the area would reopen, especially with magic poison involved. The forest sealed 5 years ago was a clear example, as its investigation was still unresolved. To make matters worse, taxes imposed on adventurers by the guild had increased. Adventurers were being treated harshly, and Zach believed the capital would continue to decline. Al began worrying about Kagaru's future. Zach said their party had enough strength, monster subjugation work, and old connections to remain active. However, newer parties with younger members were struggling, especially as even basic requests were disappearing. Bernie realized that new adventurers were no longer arriving. Even if he sold magical tools, there was a clear limit when adventurers were his only customers. Joseph then recalled something and suggested selling the weapon Bernie had created earlier. He was referring to the cannon. Bernie explained that producing it was unrealistic because it required great magic ore. They had only discovered one piece by chance, and it was far too rare to mass produce. The cannon also consumed nearly all its energy in a single shot, making it impractical. At that moment, Scott arrived looking for Bernie. He said he was just passing through and invited Bernie to return to the workshop. Zach jokingly told Scott to come back to adventuring if blacksmithing became too much. Scott dismissed the idea, reminding him that he was retired. Zach wished them both well, and Scott agreed. While walking back, Scott asked Bernie if something had been troubling him. Bernie said he was thinking about how to spread magical tools beyond adventurers. Scott thought his son was thoughtful and wished he could contribute as well. As they talked, Scott noticed a letter in their mailbox. After reading it, he learned it was from Principal Regal. The principal praised the craftsmanship of the staff Lucille had used and formally requested 50 staves for the academy. Bernie was shocked by the large order. The letter also instructed them to accept magic ore that would be produced by a magic circle shown within it. A magic circle appeared nearby and dropped magic ore onto the ground. Bernie called out to his father, and Scott realized he finally had meaningful work again. He wanted to show his sons a dependable back they could rely on. He asked for Bernie's help, and they returned to the workshop filled with motivation. At the academy, a bird carrying a letter flew across the sky. Lucille sat on a bench with her friend, commenting on how pleasant the weather felt. Her friend agreed, saying it was perfect for eating lunch in the garden. Lucille took out a sandwich, and her friend recognized it as the academy's limited edition item. Lucille said she had rushed to buy it, but still missed home-cooked meals. Her friend reminded her that summer break was approaching, and Lucille said she was looking forward to returning home. At that moment, the bird flew toward them. Noticing the letter on its leg, Lucille realized it was from her father when it landed on her hand. She read it and smiled. Her friend guessed it was good news. Lucille confirmed it and explained that the principal had made a request to her father. Her father and younger brother would be visiting the academy, and she wondered if they could meet. Her friend recalled that Lucille's father was a blacksmith. Lucille agreed and explained that during magic practice, the principal had praised her staff's stable magic flow, crediting its quality. She never expected him to contact her father directly. Lucille then sent the bird off with her blessings. Her friend said she was glad Lucille would reunite with her family. Lucille said she truly was happy. On their way to class, they passed an area where bull-like monsters were kept behind fences. Lucille's friend found it strange that monsters were kept on campus. Lucille recalled they were used for ecological research and admitted that even with magic restraints, being near them felt stressful. They noticed a female student feeding the monsters medicine poured into a pan. Her movements were calm and controlled. Lucille's friend remembered that students handling monsters belonged to Professor Evans' class. She said she would be too scared to do such work herself. Suddenly, one of the monsters began rampaging. Lucille tried to call for help, but the girl calmly used magic to soothe the creature. She stabilized it through gentle movements and steady breathing. Lucille and her friend were stunned. The girl calmed the monster without chanting, and Lucille sensed no magic flow. It felt as though the girl was communicating directly with the monster. After the creature relaxed, Lucille felt impressed and approached her. Lucille introduced herself as a magic studies student and asked about the technique. The girl introduced herself as Gina and hurried away while apologizing. Lucille's friend wondered why she left so abruptly. Meanwhile, Scott, Bernie, and Al gathered materials. Bernie tried chopping wood but struggled due to his size. He noticed how hard his father worked. Days passed, and Bernie stayed up late helping. Dorothy regularly brought them meals. Eventually, they completed the bulk order. Scott credited Bernie's dedication for their success. All that remained was delivery. Though transporting so many staves would be difficult, Bernie proposed a solution using a special recipe. It required a large leather bag, iron materials, and magic ore fragments. Scott quickly gathered everything, noting they still had fragments left. Bernie concentrated his magic, and a suitcase appeared instantly. Scott said it looked ordinary, but Bernie laughed. He opened it and placed the staff inside, where it vanished into subspace. Scott was amazed. Bernie explained it was a high-capacity storage bag. Scott lifted Bernie in excitement. Bernie told him not to treat him like a child. Scott laughed, reminding him that he still was one. With packing complete, they rested. The next day at the academy, the monsters behind the fences emitted thick mist and showed bloodshot eyes. Soon after, Scott, Bernie, and Al arrived safely. Scott expected the delivery to be handled at the gate and noticed the guards. One of them turned out to be Will, an old acquaintance of Scott. Will was genuinely pleased to see Scott again. Scott introduced him to Bernie as a former colleague from Kaguru, and Will was equally glad to meet Bernie, who then introduced Al as his divine beast. Al casually told the guard that he could pet him. Will froze in shock, as it was his first time seeing a divine beast, and even more surprising was the fact that it could speak. As he gently patted Al, Will asked why they had come despite already seeing their names listed as visitors. Scott explained that the visit was requested by the principal and asked for permission to enter. Will still found it difficult to believe that a former adventurer had become such a respected blacksmith. Curious, Bernie asked what kind of adventurer his father had been. We'll recall that Scott had once been a highly promising adventurer whose name was known throughout the capital. Unlike Scott, Will had quit after realizing his own limits. While Scott chose to leave to support his family with a stable profession, Will deeply respected that decision. Bernie had never known his father made that sacrifice for them. Even so, Will noticed that Scott looked healthier and more confident than before. Scott told Bernie that he would deliver the staves to the principal and suggested that Bernie go meet Lucille first. He asked Will if that was acceptable, and the guard confirmed it. Will quietly watched as they entered the academy grounds. Moments later, the hooded figure appeared behind him. Inside the academy, Bernie was struck by how vast the grounds were. Al asked if Bernie had received any message from Lucille about where to meet. Bernie checked the letter and said they would be having lunch in the garden, with a map attached for guidance. Suddenly, Bernie noticed people staring at them. He had already explained Al's existence to acquaintances in the capital, but to those unfamiliar with adventurers, Al simply looked like a monster. Bernie understood their reactions, yet it still felt wrong to have a family member judged that way. Sensing his thoughts, Al suddenly licked Bernie's cheek and told him not to worry. Meanwhile, Gina sat alone in the garden, still feeling regret over running away earlier. She told herself that it had been her chance to make friends. She remembered how the girls had seen her communicating with monsters and still tried to talk to her. As she sat there, she noticed Bernie and Al passing by while chatting. The sight startled her. The two soon sat nearby, choosing the most open spot in the garden. Gina could hardly believe there might be someone else with an ability similar to hers. She called out to Bernie and asked if he could communicate with creatures. Bernie explained that it was thanks to a magical tool that translated for him. Hearing that, Gina's excitement dulled. Since she had asked, Bernie assumed she truly possessed such an ability. Gina confirmed it and described it as a strange power. She explained that people had always called her weird for talking only to animals. Bernie wondered why, since he found her ability incredible. Gina thanked him for saying that. She shared that she came from a remote countryside with no children her age, leaving animals as her only companions. She had hoped to make friends at the academy, but fear caused her to run away when someone approached her before. She thought she was hopeless. Bernie pointed out that she had approached him and Al without hesitation, which made him believe she was kind. His words left Gina stunned. Looking closely at his face, she felt he reminded her of someone. At that moment, someone called out to Bernie. It was Lucille. Gina immediately recognized her as the girl from earlier. Bernie realized Gina had been referring to his sister. Lucille expressed how much she missed them and hugged Al. More importantly, she wanted to know whether Bernie had done anything reckless in Rodneo Valley. Gina tried to quietly slip away, but accidentally stepped on a branch. A snapping sound caught Lucille's attention, and she asked if Gina was with Bernie. Gina said it had only been by chance. Bernie invited her to join them for lunch, and Al encouraged her as well. Lucille agreed. Bernie flashed a small peace sign toward Gina, who finally nodded. They all sat together in the garden, and Bernie said it was time to bring out lunch. Lucille looked confused when she saw he carried nothing. Then Bernie pulled an entire basket of food from his small waist bag. Lucille immediately recognized it as a magical tool and felt relieved knowing how dependable her little brother had become. She was also surprised by how nutritious the sandwiches looked. Bernie shared their mother's message, reminding Lucille to eat well and take care of herself. Lucille felt touched and told everyone to start eating. After the meal, Lucille and Gina talked about how Professor Evans had personally asked Gina to care for the monsters. Gina explained that the professor believed her ability to communicate with monsters was not particularly useful within the academy. Bernie was not surprised, given how many monsters were kept there. Al asked whether the creatures ever became violent. Gina explained that they were restrained by special magic and had recently been given medicine for calming and disease prevention. Lucille was impressed that the academy supported both monster care and diverse research. She noticed anesthetic herbs growing nearby for pharmaceutical studies, which Bernie had already identified. Meanwhile, the principal admired the staves and praised their quality. She confirmed receiving all 50 and expressed hope that Scott would assist the academy again in the future. Scott felt honored by the request. The principal then mentioned Lucille's remarkable achievements. Scott asked what she meant. She explained that Lucille's grades were excellent and that she had recently broken a mock battle winning streak record. Lucille was not content with merely becoming a grand mage. The principal believed her success came from consistent effort. Scott felt proud and relieved hearing that his daughter was doing well. The principal told him to rest easy and entrust Lucille to the academy. Scott accepted and excused himself. The moment he opened the door, the hooded man appeared before him. The man remarked that Scott was late but said it did not matter. He tapped the door, and a magic circle slowly formed. Scott demanded to know who he was. Outside, Will lay lifeless in a pool of blood. The hooded man claimed he wished to avoid disturbing the principal or Scott. He addressed Scott by his full name and even mentioned Bernie. Cold sweat ran down Scott's back as he angrily demanded how the man knew their names. The hooded man replied that Bernie had inconvenienced him recently, so he came personally. He activated his magic, causing the monsters within the academy to rapidly grow. Students nearby screamed in terror. Bernie and the others heard the screams and saw students fleeing, urging them to run as well. Bernie struggled to understand what was happening. Lucille realized the panic came from the monster care facility and felt a surge of dread. Gina stared in disbelief as the monsters she cared for turned massive and uncontrollable. She could not understand why this was happening. Bernie then noticed traces of magic poison on the monsters. Lucille raised her staff, declaring there was no time to hesitate. Gina stopped her and insisted that she would take responsibility for the monsters herself. She tried to calm them with her power. For a few seconds, their eyes returned to normal, but the darkness quickly took over again. The monsters continued rampaging and charged straight toward Gina. Lucille rushed in and saved her, casting ice freeze as shards of ice formed around the creatures. Lucille prepared to freeze them completely, but Gina begged her to stop, saying the monsters were not bad beings. She blamed herself for failing to take proper care of them. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded for Lucille not to kill them. Lucille hesitated, but another monster suddenly moved to attack a nearby student. Al arrived in time and knocked the monster away. He bit into its horn and hurled the massive creature aside, then ordered the student to escape. Bernie immediately began helping with evacuation efforts. He searched for a way to calm the monsters without defeating them outright, focusing on solving the magic poison issue. Another monster tried to crush Lucille and Gina. Lucille quickly reinforced her defenses, hoping to buy enough time to cast healing magic on the monsters. Hearing her plan, Bernie wondered how he could immobilize them instead. He noticed nearby herbs and called out to his sister, saying he would create a tool to stop the monsters from moving and that she needed to hold on a little longer. He said he had learned the importance of teamwork in Rodneo Valley and believed they could combine their strengths again. Seeing his confidence, Lucille trusted him. Bernie promised he would restrain the monsters no matter what and rode off with Al to prepare. Meanwhile, back in the principal's office, Scott faced the ominous hooded figure. Bernie asked Al to take him to the area where anesthetic grass was grown. Along the way, Al noticed injured students crying and calling for help. Realizing there was still time, they rushed forward. They reached a small garden where Al detected the scent of anesthetic grass. Bernie quickly located the plants and pulled out his magic ore charm. Al said he would return to rescue the remaining students and asked if Bernie would manage alone. Bernie replied that he would finish quickly and rejoin him. As Al left, Bernie opened his status window and looked toward a nearby bench. A student collapsed nearby, unable to move due to her injuries. A monster rushed toward her, but Al arrived in time, grabbed the student, and carried her to safety. After calming her, he charged another monster and tackled it. The students were stunned as the creature they once feared was now protecting them. Al fought alone, but was eventually forced back and stabbed by another monster's horn. Panic spread as students wondered whether fleeing was the right choice while Al struggled. Just as Al neared his limit, several students returned and shielded him with defensive magic. The boys declared they could still contribute, and even the girls stepped forward, determined to defend the academy together. Al was shocked by their resolve. At that moment, Bernie returned and announced he was finished. Meanwhile, Scott heard the screams echoing through the halls as he confronted the hooded man. Fury surged within him as he demanded to know what had been done. The man replied that it was merely an experiment and claimed he would not allow interference from Scott or the principal. Wind magic wrapped around Scott, attempting to tear him apart. The man believed Scott was only skilled in close combat and no match for a mage. To him, the once famous adventurer was easy prey. Scott suddenly vanished and reappeared behind the man with a knife at his neck. He said that even a small blade meant for self-defense was enough to take a life and demanded answers about the students and the man's true objective. The hooded man was stunned that Scott evaded magic using sheer physical ability. He applauded and repeated that it was only an experiment and that Scott did not need to know more. He then detonated a spell that blasted Scott across the corridor. Scott realized the magic should have harmed its caster, yet the hooded man remained unharmed. Acknowledging Scott's speed, the man decided to attack faster. Scott dodged repeatedly and found an opening to slash the man's neck, but his blade was blocked. The hooded man mocked him and launched a sphere of dark magic that struck Scott's abdomen, sending him crashing into the far wall. He claimed that a former adventurer like Scott never stood a chance. Scott thought of his family. Though no longer an adventurer, he was a blacksmith who protected those he loved. With a flick of his fingers, multiple blades appeared from thin air. The hooded man noticed the knife had split into fragments as the blades flew toward him. He dodged and praised Scott's ingenuity, but Scott seized the moment to strike again. The hooded man avoided the attack, but his hood slipped slightly, revealing a mark on his back that Scott recognized. Outside on the academy grounds, students continued struggling to restrain the enraged monsters. Suddenly, a voice warned them to get down. Bernie rode atop Al, holding a crossbow loaded with arrows coated in a special mixture. Each shot homed in on its target, knocking monsters down one after another. Bernie confirmed it was working. He had created the tool using anesthetic grass, magic ore, benchwood, and iron, and its power was more than sufficient. He aimed again. Lucille admitted she was nearly out of magic while maintaining defensive spells. Bernie told her and Gina to duck, and Lucille felt relieved by his return. Bernie fired more paralytic arrows into the monster. Several struck true, causing it to collapse partially, yet it remained conscious. Bernie felt confused. The monster roared violently, forcing the girls to the ground. Bernie questioned why the anesthetic failed. At that moment, someone arrived asking what was happening and why the monsters were suffering a magic poison rampage. It was Professor Evans. Gina asked why the monsters behaved this way despite receiving their medicine. Evans struggled to process the scene. He explained that the medicine they administered was meant to calm the monsters and prevent illness based on information he had received. Bernie wondered who provided that guidance. Gina suddenly realized the truth. She understood that she had caused the disaster by giving the medicine. She collapsed, overwhelmed with guilt. Lucille watched her cry briefly before standing up. She told Gina to look around. Gina turned and saw injured students scattered across the grounds. Lucille said everyone was doing everything they could with the means they had, yet Gina was giving up far too easily. Lucille told her to stay strong if she truly wanted to save the monsters. She then asked Bernie to repeat what he did before, promising she would use healing magic at the perfect moment. Gina believed she shared an emotional bond with the monsters, and with Lucille beside her, she slowly stood up for everyone around her. Lucille felt a wave of relief. Gina declared she would save them no matter what. She took Lucille's wand and channeled her ability through it. While still protected by the defensive barrier, she said she would try to reach the monsters once more. Lucille understood and told Bernie to be ready with the anesthetic as soon as she gave the signal. Gina activated her ability and asked the monster if it could hear her. She told it to breathe slowly, like before, and promised she would never let it suffer again. She asked it to trust her. But the monster's eyes turned black once more, and it began rampaging again. Gina realized the magic poison was blocking her voice and preventing her from reaching them. She hoped they could find a way to weaken the poison. Lucille noticed the monsters had calmed slightly, but the situation remained dangerous. Her healing magic worked best through close contact, which strengthened its effect. The only idea she had was to maintain the barrier while healing at the same time, a double spell she had never attempted before. She wasn't sure she could pull it off, and even if she succeeded, the healing would be weaker. Even so, it was the only option left. Gina reminded Lucille that she believed in her just as much as Lucille believed in her. Lucille agreed, realizing she needed to trust everyone and herself. She remembered what happened earlier and moved to the right position to protect them. She cast an enhanced defense maintain spell and told Bernie to go. Bernie fired his shots, striking the monster with multiple arrows. While chanting her spell, Lucille told him to leave the rest to her. She then cast heal on the arrows lodged in the monster's body. As the healing magic flowed through them, thick black mist poured from the monster's mouth. Bernie immediately understood what his sister had done. Gina seized the moment and spoke to the monster. She apologized for causing it so much pain. She knew they never wanted to lose control like this. She admitted she had never had friends before, and because of the monsters she cared for, her time at the academy no longer felt lonely. She asked them to let her look after them again once everything was over, because they were precious friends to her. Lucille promised she would stay with her. Gina smiled, and together they vowed to save the monsters. They combined their abilities, helping the monster heal and calm down. The monster finally broke free from the magic poison and collapsed to the ground. Gina rushed forward and hugged it, crying in relief. Lucille also fell to the ground, her strength finally giving out. Bernie tapped her arm and asked for a high five. Lucille smiled and returned it. Meanwhile, Scott recognized the mark on the hooded man's back. The man clenched his fists and suddenly moved with incredible speed, almost like a trained close combat fighter. Scott dodged his punch and countered with his knife. They exchanged blows until the hooded man jumped back to create distance. He showed clear irritation at how persistent and troublesome Scott was. Pulling back his hood, he revealed a bald head and admitted he never intended to get serious in this fight. He flicked his fingers, and a large magic circle formed beneath his feet. Thick black mist leaked out, shaping itself into something resembling a four-winged bird. Scott thought the fight wouldn't be interesting unless both sides went all out. The bald man prepared to finish him. At that moment, the wall behind him exploded inward. Someone used enhanced restraint to bind both the summoned creature and the bald man. The bald man muttered that this was exactly why he wanted to keep the principal trapped. Principal Regal stepped through the broken wall with a stern expression and demanded he take responsibility for the chaos he caused in her academy. The bald man said his time was up. Scott felt anger rise, wondering if he planned to escape. The man replied that he had already gained enough results and that they would meet again. Scott tried to behead him, but the man dissolved into dust. Before vanishing, he whispered a final farewell to Scott. In an instant, the culprit was gone. Meanwhile, Evans lowered his head and apologized, taking full responsibility. Gina asked if the medicine truly caused the incident, and Evans confirmed it was likely the reason. He believed the repeated doses triggered the rampage, though other factors may have contributed. Gina realized the medicine was never meant for disease prevention. Lucille grew curious and asked where they obtained it. Evans explained that a man had come some time ago, selling a disease prevention sedative made from magic poison. He wanted them to conduct clinical tests on the school's monsters. As the person in charge, Evans refused anything suspicious. The man then presented a national approval document proving the drug's effectiveness. Evans said he still had it and produced the papers bearing the king's signature. Suddenly, the document exploded in front of them. Everyone jumped back in shock. Lucille sensed magic behind it and believed it was meant to erase the evidence. Bernie asked who the man was. Evans said the man never revealed his name or affiliation, but ordinary people couldn't obtain national approval so easily. He assumed the man had government connections. Now that the documents were gone, they had no proof. Someone then spoke up, saying they had an idea. It was Scott, with the principal behind him. Lucille grew worried when she noticed Scott's injuries. Scott explained that a mysterious man attacked the principal's office and was likely the same person who sold the medicine. During the fight, he saw a mark on the man's back, one belonging to the kingdom's magic core. The others struggled to accept it. The principal stated that the academy suffered serious damage, and although Evans meant no harm, she couldn't allow him to act independently. Everyone involved needed to speak with her. Evans accepted responsibility and promised to explain everything. As the others went to receive treatment, Scott called out to Bernie. He said the mysterious man knew about the Rodney O'Valley incident and even knew Bernie's name. He asked if Bernie had noticed anyone suspicious back then. Bernie was shocked and said he hadn't. For now, Scott was simply relieved that Bernie was safe. Bernie fell into deep thought. The monsters in Rodney O'Valley might not have appeared naturally, just like this incident. For reasons he couldn't yet understand, someone was deliberately targeting families and comrades. That man also knew Bernie and might come after him again. Bernie realized he needed to grow much stronger. With a firm, steady expression, he swore to protect everyone important to him.